Once upon a time, not too long ago, a university employee and graduate student, who by the way now happens to be a high-ranking member of the Southern Baptist Convention, attended Mass at a nearby Catholic parish. I should say that this person was energetically anti-Catholic. He had entered the liturgy with the sole purpose of obtaining a consecrated host for a special purpose. It was toward the end of the Mass when this fellow entered the church. He quietly got into a communion line. Once in front of the extraordinary minister of communion, he received the host on the tongue, as he had watched people do on EWTN many times. Then, without swallowing, he quietly and quickly exited the building and got into his car. From the glove compartment, he quickly took out a prepared Ziploc bag and spit the host into it. He sealed the bag. A biology major and creationist besides, this man drove to the university and placed the semi-dissolved host on a petri dish. He next began to observe the material through a microscope. His preconceived idea was confirmed. It was carbohydrates only. In a great bombast of triumphalism, the next day he celebrated his sacrilege to his fellow Christian collegians. "I knew it all along," he exclaimed gleefully. "This disproves the false doctrine of the real presence. The physical substance is nothing but bread." For any Protestant fundamentalists listening to this story, I want to ask you some questions. First, what do you think? Was the anti-Catholic right? Did he really disprove Catholic teaching? By the way, like all Christian fundamentalists, the anti-Catholic in the story firmly believes that every human person has a soul. Do you believe that? What if we extracted blood from this man, or from you, and put it under a microscope? Would we rightly say that this man and you have no soul, because clearly all we see inside the blood inside of you is just physical matter? This anti-Catholic who committed the sacrilege in the church also believes in God. He believes that God is a sovereign God, one who controls every aspect of the universe. Likewise, he believes the risen and ascended Jesus is God and Lord over all creation. Imagine we use a space telescope to look out deep into the cosmos. After scanning the heavens, when we fail to see the literal face of God out there, should we conclude that God is just a fantasy and that Christ is a lie? The man who stole the host believes that Jesus' resurrection was not only a bodily reality, but is a physical reality also. And thus, he believes that the ascension was literal space travel. When we inform him that we cannot find the risen Jesus by space telescope, nor pinpoint his trajectory and velocity, should he then repudiate Christianity? This anti-Catholic scientist, despite being a biology major, holds dearly that the planet Earth and universe are only a few thousand years old. To believe in creation means to believe in creationism. So what if we use solid science to demonstrate the absurdity of his beliefs? Should he then cease believing and become an atheist? Because, after all, his creationist beliefs have failed to match reality. Let's be logically consistent with this man. Now, I know that not only are there fundamentalist Protestants listening to this story, there are also Catholic fundamentalists listening to this story. So I want to address them and ask them some questions. For my Catholic fundamentalist brothers and sisters, having listened to this tragically sad story, how do you understand the Church's chosen adverbs truly, really, and substantially, used to describe the real presence of Jesus in official teaching on the Eucharist? Let's say, typical of many Catholic fundamentalists, you insist that substance in the Church's teaching on the real presence means a physical chemical substance. Well, what happened then with the anti-Catholic's experiment? What happens to your faith? Do you, as a Catholic, believe that at the words of consecration spoken by a validly ordained priest or bishop celebrating the Mass, that a physical and chemical transformation occurs in the bread and wine? Do you believe that real presence and transubstantiation represent a real physical change in the host? But look at the experiment by this man who committed the sacrilege. If that gets disproven, what then becomes of your faith? The official Catholic teaching on the Eucharist is heavily indebted to Thomas Aquinas, who spoke about the possibility of Eucharistic wonders, sometimes anachronistically called Eucharistic miracles. Such wonders fascinate many Catholics today. They are brought up ad nauseum every Corpus Christi in train wreck homilies given throughout the Archdiocese of Miami, in sunny South Florida, always excellent at spiritual abuse and pooling ignorance. Aquinas says that if God wanted to, God could manifest a real physical change in the consecrated elements at Mass. For instance, Aquinas claims that God could physically or chemically change the material structure of the host into blood, or heart tissue, or the appearance of a recognizable face. But according to Aquinas, even in such wondrous cases, even in such marvels, the blood and flesh manifested on the altar there could not be the real properties of the risen Jesus, because the real Jesus bleeds no more. Given all that, what becomes of your Eucharistic beliefs? I want to talk seriously for a moment about the faith, so-called faith, of fundamentalists, whether they're Catholic, Protestant, or of any religious tradition. Think about this story. If you do that, you should get something fundamental about all fundamentalists. You know what they are? They're really just scratch-off atheists. Recalling the crime that the man did in the church, wouldn't it be a sacrilege to go through life misusing apologetics to prove into metaphysical certitude your faith? Wouldn't it be a sacrilege to call yourself a Christian and a believer when you're really just a rationalist, an atheist in disguise and self-denial? Isn't it sacrilege to confuse faith with certitude? To distort the reasonable with the rational? Fundamentalism, like most silly versions of atheism, not all atheism is silly, but silly versions of atheism, which are by far the most common. Fundamentalism is a rationalistic approach to faith, just like silly atheism. But faith is reasonable, not rational. Faith is reasonable to the extent that it is not absurd to believe, and indeed it makes good sense to believe. It's convincing, it's life transformative in a healing way. Faith is reasonable to the extent that accepting Christ is not renunciation of the intellect. So it's reasonable in that we can show that life in Christ is more meaningful than life without Him. But faith is not rational, provable through reason or logic alone. Faith cannot be proven through reason alone. Faith is not as if an unprejudiced observer, under the impact of your logical arguments, would be forced to mentally assent to it, otherwise violate her own integrity. This is what many popular Catholic authors, speakers, and so-called apologists would have us believe. They perennially present revelation and faith as achievable through reason alone. You don't need any supernatural help from God. They make the conviction of faith into a natural act. But the Second Council of Orange condemned their position in 529 Common Era. People who seek to defend the faith should get the fundamentals concerning apologetics right. Real apologetics is that branch of theology, the critical reflection of faith, that shows the faith to be reasonable or not absurd. Moreover, real apologetics shows belief and life in Christ to be convincing, relevant, and inviting. But what it never does is attempt to prove to metaphysical certitude the truths of the faith, or demean and denigrate as stupid or diabolic other faith traditions. To do either of these things is something other than apologetics or evangelization, namely the machinations of proselytism, brainwashing, getting people to be shaken in their present faith commitments and join us. Ask a fundamentalist Catholic to explain what proofs mean to Thomas Aquinas, such as in his famous 5 proofs. Quite likely the response you'll get will present something alien to what Aquinas actually had in mind. My friends, in the next few videos, we will look at fundamentalists on both sides of the Tiber River and how they have made a hot mess concerning belief in Jesus' resurrection.